Hi, it's Pastor Chris. I'm just here at the beginning of this video to let you know that for this service at First Congregational United Church of Christ in DeWitt, we had a blessing of the animals, and that means that we were meeting outside. And that means that we don't really have video for this service, but we still do have audio of the sermon. So that's kind of all you're gonna get, which is great and is fine and is enough. I'm just letting you know that there aren't gonna be any cool visuals or anything. This is more something to just listen to. So I do hope you enjoy, and thank you very much for taking the opportunity to hear this sermon. We don't often read from the book of Job in worship. It's not one of the major books that we really love to have when we're being celebratory because it is kind of a hard book. But it is also one of my favorite books of Scripture. If you don't remember the outline, the book of Job begins and ends with this prose story. This ancient story, this story that has been told time and again from culture to culture. God is bragging about his servant Job, who is awesome. Job does everything that he is supposed to do and goes above and beyond. Job does not do anything he's not supposed to do and takes care of others when they mess up. Job gets up at 5. Job's giving it all he's got. Job's job lasts from 6 to 9, and Job is home by 9:05. Job knows what he is doing, and God is telling everyone, all of the angels, all of God's court, that Job is awesome. And then the adversary shows up and says to God, of course Job is awesome. Job's rich. Job has a huge family. Job has a big farm. Job has everything that Job could possibly want. Job never gets sick. Job never gets tired. Job never just has too much on his plate. I wager that if that were taken away from Job, Job would stop being so awesome. Job would curse you. Job would become that guy who none of us want to be. So God says, go ahead. Give him all you got. I bet he stays on the right path. I bet he stays awesome. And so the adversary does all sorts of terrible things to Job. The adversary kills Job's animals. The adversary kills Job's family. The adversary makes Job sick. The adversary gives Job boils. The adversary makes Job miserable. But Job does not curse God. And so, at the end of the book, God restores all that Job has. Job gets new animals and a new family, because kids are interchangeable, apparently. His health is restored. He's all good. His wealth comes back. And the moral of that story is, if you're awesome, God will give you good things. And if by chance those good things should disappear, stay awesome, and more good things will come. So somebody saw that story and said, hold up a sec. That doesn't sound right. And wrote the big middle part of the book. Poem after poem after poem of Job complaining. Not cursing God, but just saying, hey, God, I need to know what's going on here. Things have gotten kind of messed up. I'm sort of suffering, and I keep being awesome. And I would just like to know what's going on. Job wants to take God to court. And Job's friends show up and sit down with him and comfort him in the worst way possible by telling him, you must have done something to deserve this. Maybe you're not as awesome as you think. Maybe you messed up somewhere. Maybe you sinned somewhere. Maybe you are, in fact, a terrible person and you deserve this. And Job keeps saying, no, I'm awesome. I would just like an explanation. And eventually, after all of that, we get to today's reading. Close to the end of Job, right before we hop back into that story and everything is made okay again, God shows up and starts talking about how awesome God is. Do you, Job, know all of the stuff I do? Do you, Job, know all of the stuff I can do? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you let the wild ass go free? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Do you understand ostriches at all? And God goes even bigger. Have you seen the behemoth out there on the fields? I can control that. I made that. It does what I want it to do. Have you seen Leviathan in the sea? I made that. I play with that. I splash around with that. Do you really think you're in a position, Job, to question me? I mean, if you want to, go ahead, but I kind of know what I'm doing. There's a problem with this text. There's a problem with this bit of the story. You see, it has often been read as a statement about God's sovereignty, God's power. And that if Job wants to, Job can ask questions. If Job wants to, Job can show up. If Job wants to, Job can try to sue God. But God's got all the power. And because God has all the power, God can do what God wants. And if that means giving Job wealth and glory, he can. And if that means taking that all away, they can. But that is up to God. And as frustrated as Job may be, Job is in no actual position to question that. There's this thing that happens in movies sometime. This thing that happens to movies sometimes. Some of you might be familiar with the Die Hard franchise of films. You may have seen the first one, the best Christmas movie ever made outside of The Muppet Christmas Carol. But there's a whole bunch of them. They keep going. They keep making these. They've tried to keep Bruce Willis working well into old age. One of those movies is called Die Hard with a Vengeance. I've never seen it. I've only ever seen the first one. But here's what I know about that movie. That movie did not start out as a Die Hard movie. Started out as a standalone film. Somebody wrote it, somebody wanted to make it, someone wanted to produce it. They tried attaching people to it, and it just didn't take off. It was called Simon Says, and the studios were like, we're not so sure. So somebody took it and retooled it. Said, we're going to make this a Lethal Weapon movie. The Mel Gibson version of Die Hard. We're going to make this a Lethal Weapon movie. And they worked on it, and they rewrote it, and they changed names, and they switched the plot around a little, and they rewrote scenes, and they tried to figure it out, and they were like, it doesn't quite work. And then somebody said, what if we made it a Die Hard movie? What if we brought Bruce Willis in? And so they took it and they rewrote it and they changed scenes and they started production and they did all this stuff, and it became Die Hard with a Vengeance. I tell you this because this is a thing that happens in Hollywood. A movie gets made, or a movie gets written at least. A movie has folks attached. A movie has somebody who wants to direct it, but they don't think it's going to make it on its own, and so they attach it to something else. They make it a part of a franchise. If you look hard enough, your favorite franchise probably has one of those, and if a franchise goes on long enough, eventually you start going, this doesn't feel like it was originally part of this series of movies. It was something else first, and they brought it in. And I sometimes wonder, and I'm not basing this on scholarship, I'm not basing this on what others have said, I sometimes wonder if somebody had this story of Job, and then somebody wrote all of this stuff about a guy who was suffering and questioning God, and his friends were doing a terrible job of comforting him, and somebody said, hey, what if we made that about this guy Job? This guy who's mentioned kind of offhandedly in the book of Ezekiel, but this guy who people like, and there's already this really weird story about him. It's kind of prosperity gospel-ish. Like we could just shove this in there, change the names. It'll work. And so I want to take this bit of God's speech out on its own. Like it's not part of this story that we have to deal with, this weird thing where God decides that Job is awesome but can be taught a lesson. Because maybe this speech that God is giving is not about how God is sovereign. Maybe the speech that God is giving is not about how God has all the power. Maybe the speech that God is giving is about telling Job, look, man, it's not all about you. There's a whole world here. A whole creation with all sorts of stuff going on. There are mountain goats and wild asses and wild oxes. There are ostriches. There are behemoths and leviathans. There's all sorts of stuff, and you are a part of that. And sometimes being part of that is going to be good, and sometimes being part of that is going to be a problem. Sometimes it's going to work, and sometimes it's not. Things are going to come, and things are going to go, but you are part of something big, part of something grand, part of something amazing. And I wonder if the lesson is that we too, each and every one of us, is part of something amazing. A whole creation that we share with animals and plants and little bugs and all of that kind of stuff all over the place. And if what God is proposing, if what God is suggesting is that maybe this life is not about us, I as an individual, us as a church, us as a community, us as a species, having all of the best all of the time. Maybe this life is about fitting in to God's creation. Maybe this life is about making room for all of God's creatures, great and small. Maybe part of this life is recognizing that God, our God, the God of First Congregational United Church of Christ, is also the God of the sparrow and the God of the whale. And that if we want to be good neighbors, if we want to have a good neighborhood, if we want that power of neighborliness and that joy of neighborliness, one of the things that we have to do is make room for those neighbors, make space for those neighbors, help create and cultivate an environment where those neighbors can also live, because when those neighbors do well, we do well too. Maybe part of this life is recognizing that this world is not all about us. It is about so much more. At the end of the book, as I said, Job gets all of his stuff back, or at least all new stuff and all new family, and probably goes off and finds some new friends who are better at comforting him. And I wonder if we as a congregation, if we as a community, if we as a species paid more attention to the world around us, to our beastly neighbors, to our plant neighbors, to our environmental neighbors, to all of those creatures who share the world with us, if we did a better job of caring for them, of making room for them, of loving them, if we wouldn't find that we would get so much more back. I think that we would. I think that we would. I believe that we would. I have faith that we would, because God is in fact sovereign. And God has made a world that is not all about us, but in which we are loved as part of a vast and wonderful creation, and where we have neighbors of all different shapes and sizes, and where it all works together somehow to make a place that is beautiful, to make a place that is loved, to make a place that can be full of love. And once it is, we too get to participate in that love. What a wonderful world that would be.